Welcome back. Now we're going to talk about service slices. And I'd like you to think about where we left off. Previously, we conducted a service artifact audit in order to identify all of the artifacts that impact an experience. We've started with that audit, we have the raw material, and now we're going to create service slices in order to identify touch points. And to identify touch points, we need to understand what touch points are. Touch points are going to be any point of interaction that somebody has with our service. We started to talk about these previously as things like people, artifacts, environment, processes, and policies. All of these become the different ways, the different points of interaction that we have with the service. And so service slices are going to isolate specific aspects of an experience so we can better make sense of complexity. Our goals are to hone in on specific touch points, to really empathize with people throughout the process, to create a visual representation of something that's intangible, that surface, we can't really touch it, we can't hold it, so we're going to try to create a representation of it that can be touched and held, and to develop artifacts that communicate complexity, but communicate them in a simple way. This is going to be an artifact that takes the breadth of the experience and the service and boils it down to a variety of different views. Service slices cut through time. Experiences are shaped by interactions of different types, and we're going to cut through the time of interaction. You can think of this like we're freezing time in order to inspect the experience. We're going to have 4 different lenses through which we look at that experience. The first is called behavior and information exchange. The next is power, policy, influence, and emotion. The third is artifacts, and the fourth is environments. And here's how to create service slices. Let's look at it as an overview, and then we'll go into some detail. First, hand out the transcript to all your team members. There's an assumption here that you're not working by yourself because this can be really arduous if you're doing it all alone. Make sure everybody's read the transcript and all of the numbers are labeled, and individually read the whole thing. It's worth taking a side trip to talk about where this transcript came from. It's not part of this workshop, but learning how to do qualitative ethnographic research is fundamental to all design. This transcript is a result of spending time in the field, talking to people, understanding the experiences they have, and watching the behavior and the interactions that they have with your company. And after doing that, filming it, audio recording it, we'll transcribe and type the entire thing so that we have a log of all of the utterances that happen throughout the entire process. Now, as a group, discuss the interview in general terms and make sure everybody knows what's going on. Make sure that everybody walked away from their reading with the same overall idea of the interview. Set up large sheets of paper on the wall. You'll have one for each of the 4 slices. And then we're going to walk through the interview line by line. And at each line, we're going to go from piece of paper to piece of paper asking, is there anything here that we can add to this slice? How about the next slice? How about the 3rd one or the 4th one? As we go through, we'll identify problems, frustrations, and disconnects, and we'll put a big exclamation point near there in red. And again, as we come up with design ideas, we'll add them to the design idea parking lot. We're going to create those 4 different slices, and I'll give you a preview here of what they look like. Behavior and information exchange, power, policy, influence, and emotion, artifacts, and environment. And let's get started with behavior and information exchange. This is going to be a visualization of the things people do and the information that's shared during a service experience, how work is divided and coordinated. And as you look at this, you'll see some complexity to this. You'll see different circles, squares, arrows, and labels. So let's walk through where this came from. The way that this is going to occur and the way that this is built is by moving through the entire transcript line by line. And so as we read the transcript here, we can see on line 3, the participant Matt says, "I'm thinking of getting a tattoo." And he says it to Sarah, the front desk clerk. So what you'll see here is we have a diagrammatic representation of what's starting to emerge in the service. We have 2 bubbles, one of Matt, one of Sarah, and we have a connection point between those 2. And now we'll move to the 4th line. Okay, we can help you with that. Do you know what you want to get? And so now we have a line going from Sarah back to Matt. We've started to articulate the connections that people have and the ways that what they say changes the information flow between them. There's information passing back and forth between Matt and Sarah, and we're capturing it line by line in a very rigorous, almost excruciating way. Let's keep trekking along through that transcript. The next line, we could start to add more connections between Matt and Sarah. And now in line 6, we'll see that an introduction of an artifact occurs. Sarah is going to start to show example art books to Matt, and Matt can start to flip through them. There's an idea in tattooing culture called flash art. These are often highly visual artwork that you can flip through in the studio and decide, oh, I want this one, it's a picture of Mickey Mouse, or I want that one, it's a picture of Donald. It's like pre-created artwork. And so in this case, Matt's going to flip through that flash tattoo art book, and he's looking specifically on line 9 at Jim's art book. Jim is a tattoo artist, and so he's starting to look through his work. And you can start to see over time how all of this builds. You can see here what looks to be very complicated, but because it was created in a very methodical way, you as the designer know all of the different connection points. You understand why all of the data that's displayed on this is there. It's all purposeful because you were along for the synthesis of complexity. There's a couple things that we're going to do on the diagram really specifically to make sure that they're always continuous. First, individuals are represented by circles. You'll see here Jim, Matt, and Sarah make up the individuals in this particular transcript. Next, the artifacts, both the physical and digital touch points, are indicated by rectangles. You'll see some of them here. Matt needs to leave a deposit, and so he's paying. So a deposit gets a rectangle. Jim's art books are rectangles. The rose tattoo that they select is a rectangle. And then you'll see throughout this that there's little line numbers. After every single label, you can see a number in parentheses. These numbers are a citation back to the core content. You'll see red exclamation points throughout the diagram as well, and each one of these represents when something was going wrong. These might be disconnects, problems, or frustrations. And similarly, it's tempting when you see something wrong to go fix it. And so we're going to create that design parking lot where we're going to put those green notes. This is going to be the first model, that behavior and information exchange model. It's going to represent information flow and the way that people behave, and it's going to give us a visual representation of the entire transcript. We went through line by line, very methodically adding content all the way through the entire experience. Let's look at the second model. This is called the Power, Policy, Influence, and Emotion model. And at first glance, it looks very similar to the behavior and information exchange model. It has circles and lines and labels. But this is going to illustrate the way people feel, the influences that cause those feelings. On this model, people and policies are represented by circles, and you'll start to see the connection points between people. As you can see, Matt is required to pay a deposit to Jim before the tattoo starts to ensure that he's actually able to pay for the tattoo. And there's an exclamation point there because there's a lack of trust that's communicated through that rule. That rule is there for a good reason. Probably the tattoo artist has in the past been shorted on the money. But by asking for that deposit up front, it instantly creates a rapport that's characterized by distrust, and it negatively impacts the service. And so we'll draw those bubbles, we'll connect them with the lines and the labels, and then we'll add that red exclamation point to make sure that we call out that it's a problem. The next model that we're going to create is the artifact model. These are going to be the items, we're going to include both physical and digital, that are used throughout the service experience. And we're going to represent them by illustrations. You can see here some crude illustrations of each of the objects that are used throughout the entire tattooing process. We're going to use artifacts as sketches rather than photographs because it forces us to isolate specific key elements of value. It forces us to identify things that matter and to abstract away things that are less important. You'll also see here that there's red exclamation points near some of the items. The idea of the consent form, again, gets that red exclamation point on it in order to call out that it's problematic. And we're again going to create design ideas as we move through this. So anytime you have a good idea, write it on a green Post-it note and stick it in our design idea parking lot. The last model is the environment model. This is the place where a service experience occurs, the physical space and context. We're going to sketch a plan view or top-down view of all of the different space that has occurred. In this case, all of the tattooing experience takes place in a tattoo room. You can see the participant lying on the bed there. Some participants are watching, and the tattoo artist is doing their thing. In this space, we can also identify movement. You'll see artifacts represented. And again, we're going to have that red exclamation point and design ideas in the design parking lot. So it's worth questioning, why are we doing this? This is our next step in the process. We started with that artifact catalog, that artifact audit, and now we're starting to create these service slices. And there's several reasons that we're creating them. The first is that it builds tacit understanding of that service, and it forces us to empathize. When we have about an hour-long transcript, it might take 5 or 6 hours to create these models. And when you spend that much quality time with user data, you really start to know, understand, and empathize with the users and the people that you're trying to support and help. Next, it's going to simplify a service. It doesn't feel that way when you first look at it. It feels kind of complicated. But these models are going to simplify the service in your mind so that you can start to identify problems and isolate them from the larger context of the entire service. And it's going to allow us to start to think about how time plays a role in the experience that people have with the service. In many ways, we're freezing time. As you think about each one of these slices, it's happening irrespective of the overall customer journey. We're going to use a different tool in order to capture that. Instead, think about how these freeze time so that you can understand how people operate, interact, and think across time. As a result of this process, we're going to end up with service slices that can then be used to inform our customer journey map. That will be our next step in the process to create a visualization of how a service evolves over time. And so service slices isolate specific aspects of an experience so we can better make sense of complexity. The process that we're going to go through here is rigorous and time-consuming, but really, really effective. And so for your project, I'd like you to go through the same experience that we just learned, but with our fake telecom company, Penguin Telecom. First, pin up large sheets of paper and label them. You're going to have one each for behavior and information exchange, power, policy, influence, and emotion, artifacts, and environments. I'll use really big pads of paper, or often I'll get a roll of what's called butcher paper, spread it out on the wall, and use Sharpie in order to write these labels. Careful with the Sharpie. I've learned that often it goes through and you might end up with Sharpie on your wall. Be really careful about that. After you have those papers up on the wall, work through the tech support transcript that's included in the zip file of artifacts for the class. Read through the transcript, and we're going to work line by line in order to identify what happens and then to work across models. Read line 1 and work your way across. Say to yourself, does line 1 have anything to do with behavior and information exchange? If it does, add it to the diagram. If it doesn't, skip it. Does it have anything to do with power, policy, influence, and emotion? If it does, add it to the diagram. If not, skip it. You'll see how over time you'll start to populate all 4 diagrams with all of the content from the transcript. And again, this is going to take quite a long time, but persevere. I promise that it's worth it. As you're progressing through this, don't forget to add those red exclamation points, which indicates problems, frustrations, or disconnects. And also keep those green notes coming, that design idea parking lot, really starting to articulate ways that you can solve some of the problems that you're finding. Next, we'll talk about customer journey mapping. Good luck with your homework.